welcome. And of course, because this is the Stammtisch, is a kind of a loose atmosphere. Herr Bundespräsident, I just want to say, call me Arnold. Don't call me governor, okay? Because it's a very casual kind of atmosphere, the Stammtisch.
Right. And you call me Sasha.
Okay, Sasha. Anyway, let me just ask you, because there's a lot of people that don't know you that well. In Austria, they know you well, but not internationally. So I just want to maybe let the people know. I know pretty much everything about you, but I mean, I think for them it's interesting to know, why did you get involved in environmental issues originally? And how did you join the Green Party? And how were you always kind of a crusader for a clean environment and a cleaner world?
Well, I think the relation to nature was always important for me. You know, I was brought up in the countryside in a very small village in the Tyrolean Alps. So that keeps me going in a way, you know, the relation to nature. But then I'm an economist by education. And when I was at the University of Vienna in particular, I saw suddenly, there are journals in environmental economics, famous Americans doing research on the climate change, climate crisis 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And then I thought, interesting problem. I didn't realize what was happening there.
Exactly. Well, you're always a very kind of motivating personality. You know, when you give speeches, you always give hope and stuff like that. So last year you said, together we're going to make the planet a better place. And if we all work together, we can do it. Do you still feel like that today?
Even more than I did 10 years ago or so, or even 5 years. Because, you know, when I think back 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I must say I was frustrated. I didn't see any progress in dealing with the climate crisis on the political side. And then 3 or 4 years ago, suddenly things began to change. I think one is young people, very young people, suddenly became interested. They realized it's my life that is at stake here. I'm 15 now, or 20 or 25. I can live along another 70 years or so. So if there's some truth in the climate crisis, it will happen to me. I'm old enough to say, well, you know, the worst, I will not experience the worst, but the young people will, and they realize that, starting perhaps with Greta Thunberg. She really put emotion, even fury, in getting together youth all over the world. Secondly, suddenly I realized that the business community gets interested in the problem. Banks, for instance, begin to think, well, what about my clients? Are the risks changing they are facing? And what should be my reaction as a bank to that? The same applies to insurance companies. They realize the risks are changing and they have to adapt to that. So suddenly, for instance, BlackRock or other huge investment funds are realizing that their clients are beginning to worry about their investments in fossil fuels, for instance, and to worry, well, if they invest today, maybe it will be a stranded investment in 10 years. The political side is, I think, still lagging behind, but also there, things have changed, in particular this year. The United States have come back to the Paris Agreement under President Joe Biden. The European Union has established new goals concerning the climate crisis. And so I think all over the world, the awareness of the problem has been increasing well, very fast, with a speed I wouldn't have imagined 5 years ago.
Right. Now, Sasha, what is it that makes it so difficult in a political arena to move forward with that agenda? Why is it difficult in politics to realize that we need to make changes and we need to stop pollution? What is the reason for that, you think?
I've thought about that too. I think what we have underestimated over the year that scientific evidence is important, but scientific evidence alone does not convince people. You have to put emotion into it. A friend of mine says emotion is the basis of information or realizing new information. And that, I think, this emotion is coming first from the young people. That's very good. Fridays for Future, etc. Secondly, I think what has changed is that you can see the effects of the climate change with your own eyes. Wildfires in Australia, the glaciers melting in the Alps in Europe or in the Himalayas, you name it. Evidence that, again, 2020 was I think, among the top three as far as the hot climate is concerned.
Right.
New experiences that haven't been taken seriously a couple of years ago. So the emotion is changing, the information you can see with your own eyes. You don't have to study the latest scientific report. Things like that, I think, have contributed to change the attendance to the problem, the awareness of the problem, and this won't go away.
Right. But you're absolutely correct, because I totally agree with you on when it comes to communicating. We can not only just communicate to the brain of people, but also we have to communicate to the heart. And so you're absolutely correct with that. And I think that the question I have just is, do you think that we have or the environmental community worldwide has an effective communication skills and communicating the right way to reach the people? Or do you think they have been, making an effort but not having communicated the proper way?
Right. Well, I think there's a third aspect. You have to show people that we're not helpless, to show them concrete solutions to the problem, which is really exactly the thing that the Austrian World Summit is trying to do, to show concrete solutions, not only on the national level, but on the regional and local level as well. Because if people would think, well, there's a catastrophe happening and I can't do anything about it or against it, then we would have a real problem. But that is not the case, and people begin to realize that.
But how do you communicate to the people so that they become part of the solution rather than part of the problem is really the question? Because I think that you can talk about climate change and what's going to happen in the future, and that today we are seeing already hotter temperatures and more rains and storms and fires and all of this kind of disasters. But still people feel like this is something down the line. Do you think that we should talk more about the actual pollution that causes all of these problems, and that we should get off fossil fuels because this is what is killing us and this is what creates the disasters? Do you think we should communicate better in that way?
I think we must give people time, but not too much time. For instance, in the automobile industry, in the car industry, I thought that in particular, the German car industry is, in German, you would say, die verschlafen das Problem. They are not, they haven't been awakened to the problem, whereas Japanese or South Korean car makers do. The future of the electric car. So suddenly this year, even the German car industry is aware that their future is not in diesel or gasoline-driven cars. Of course, we all know that the electric car is not the solution if the electricity that we need is produced in the coal industry. So things are complicated, but say within 10 or 20 years, we can solve these problems in Absolutely. Europe, in the United States, in China.
Absolutely. I think that the car industry, you were very nice when you said, they're kind of like asleep a little bit. Notice, I think they were totally asleep at the wheel. which is an expression we have here in America, sleep at the wheel, that you're driving and you're kind of falling asleep. And this is what has happened with the car manufacturers, because they've talked about it already in the year 2000 about electric cars. They've talked about it already then, how important it is to get off fossil fuels. We've talked about it then already, that people want to drive maybe hydrogen cars and alternative fuel cars. But they talked about it, that they created green cars, and then they created the blue technology and all of this kind of dialogue, but they never really made an effort. Now you're absolutely correct. Now we see certain changes. And I think it's because of the pressure, because the Chinese are now producing more electric cars and hydrogen cars, and the Japanese are doing the same thing. The Koreans are doing the same thing. So we are seeing great movement. And even in America, I mean, just think about it, that the Hummer, which was known as the biggest gasoline car, the car that uses the most gasoline, is now produced this year by General Motors as an electric car. So we see kind of changes, tremendous changes there. I really am angry, I have to say, at the car industry, basically in Germany, in Europe in general, and also in America, because I think they really have dragged their feet. And I think it is very important now to get going and to really speed up the process, I think. And, and we have to talk about it. That's the important thing, to talk about that. But the question really is you're always so motivated. What keeps you motivated and to keep really going and going and going? Because whenever I talk to you and call you about the Austrian Summit, our World Summit, you're always so enthusiastic. I said, I'm going to go and invite so-and-so, and we're going to bring those car factories in there, and we're going to bring those manufacturers in there, and we already have a certain amount of sponsorship money, and blah, 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 and there's more people coming. So you have such great enthusiasm always. So what keeps you motivated?
Because I realize that the times are changing. To give you an example, Tesla was among the first car producers in the world producing an electric car. I didn't take that very seriously, I must confess, but Porsche did. 3 years ago or so, I visited Baden-Württemberg, the center of car making in Germany, and I visited the Porsche factory, and they told me about their plans to produce electric Porsches. And my impression was, it was not because they suddenly believed in climate change. It was not because they anticipated political measures against the climate change. It was because they thought the competition from Tesla is too strong. We have to answer that competitive advantage that they have at the moment. So things like that, keep me going. Or meeting Greta Thunberg at the Austrian World Summit. When was it? 2 years ago?
Yes.
That she was physically here. Very interesting person. I mean, what she did at the meeting of the United Nations in that year, that really was amazing. When I was a boy, I spent 4 weeks every year at the Lake Attersee in Upper Austria. And it was well known in the 50s or even in the 60s that once you go bathing there in the lake, you will have stomach problems for about a week. And the reason, of course, was that the sewage from the villages around the lake were just going into the lake. And nowadays, the water has drinking water quality. Wow. So given the investment, given time that you can actually deal with the problem, sometimes it takes longer than it should, but it works over time. Right.
No, that is a great story.
Yeah.
Great story. No, I also know, I remember the Mur, the river that goes through Graz, my hometown, used to be so polluted that you couldn't, want to put your foot in there. And now it's very clean. Now you see the fishes in there again and stuff like that. So it's really, Austria did a tremendous job really cleaning up some of the environment. What do you think in general? Where is Austria with that now?
You mentioned the Mur. I remember a joke decades ago. In Mur, a robber in the night is confronting a man with a water pistol. And he says, money or death. And the man says, well, this is only a water pistol. The robber says, yes, but it contains more water. So it was well known
That's a good
this
joke.
is a dangerous place.
That's totally appropriate. That's absolutely, you're right. But now it's clean. That is really
Now it's
spectacular,
clean.
So there's a lot of places in Austria where they clean up. But my question is, how is Austria doing in general when it comes to environmental issues, like, for instance, reducing greenhouse gases in compared to other countries in Europe and so on? What is your estimation there?
We are not world champions. Greenhouse gas emissions have been increasing instead of decreasing. So it's really high time that we do something about it. On paper, we have strategies going on for years now, but if you look at it, what happened in practice, the outcome is not convincing, to say the least.
Right.
I think the new government has a better awareness of the problem than previous governments, but still there's, how should I put it, in the coming 2 or 3 years, I think we will see whether the government is serious about it, or whether we lose time again. We can't lose much more time. On paper, the strategy is okay, but we'll still have to put it into practice.
I think so. I totally agree with you. But so what would you recommend? Because I think that too many are relying on government to be the solution. And I think that the approach has to be a combination of from the top-down approach, from government and world leaders and the national leaders, but also from the bottom up, from people movement, the power of people. And people have tremendous power. What is it that you would suggest that they, to the average Austrian, here's what you can do to be part of our environmental movement? What is that? What can we recommend to the Austrians to do that is different from what they're doing now?
I think what we should avoid is telling them with a teacher's finger that they should absolutely, I don't know, cancel driving a car, or even thinking about buying a new car, or to stop to eat meat immediately. But everybody can do a little bit. And if you start with 10%, then maybe in 2 years you will have 20%. So perhaps you eat a little bit less meat per week or per month than you did. And perhaps you use public transport. In Vienna, for instance, you have a perfect system of public transport instead of your car. So wherever it's possible, go by train or by another public transport means instead of going with a polluting car. Things like that,
Right. What do you think about the idea of just also paying attention to where your merchandise comes from? If you buy clothes, if you buy a car, if you buy anything, I think that transporting things in those big ships, these container ships, creates a huge amount of pollution, more than cars, actually, in most cases. And so the question really is, can people be more effective by just ordering clothes and any goods that are made more in Europe rather than overseas, for instance? I think that's one of the suggestions that could help reducing the pollution. Don't you think so?
Yes. I mean, for instance, the jacket you have right now, you can wear that for decades, can't you? Whereas
I think my children and my grandchildren will be wearing this jacket. Yes.
Exactly. Shipping between continents is really a problem as far as greenhouse gas emissions are concerned. That is correct. And the recent event in the Suez Canal showed us how easily problems can arise if just one ship stops the whole traffic there.
Exactly.
On the other hand, we in Austria, we used to say Austria is a small country, which isn't quite true because we have about 9 million inhabitants, so it's not that small. Still, Austrian firms employ about 40,000 people in neighboring Slovakia. We Austrian firms employ about 20,000 people in southern neighbor Slovenia. Things like that show the international cooperation, at least within Europe in that case. And you will have to think twice about cutting those relations at the border.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. So let me ask you another thing before we finish. What was your favorite moment? We've had now several of the summits in Vienna. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind where you say, oh, this was one of my favorite moments?
Well, maybe the people, people attending, people I got to know there, like Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. He's so convinced that the climate crisis is one of the, perhaps the main challenge that humanity sees at the moment. Or Jane Goodall, the famous, not climatologist, but nature fan, now in her 80s. Greta, of course, you, meeting you, things like that. But also on the practical side, realizing how many ideas are already there, how much you can put into practice without having to invest billions and billions into research and waiting for 10 years until you get results. So it makes you optimistic to attend this meeting.
Very good. So I suggest, first of all, this was a great discussion that we had here today. I hope that people really enjoyed it. But I would love to do a real Stammtisch when I come to Vienna, where we all can sit down on a real table and bring some very interesting people, environmentalists and people from the car industry and all kinds of industries together and sit there and drink some good, Austrian beer.
Austrian beer.
Exactly, and have some good schnitzel.
Most Arnold. Really looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to it too. I'm looking forward to seeing you on July 1st at our summit. We will have all kinds of interesting guests coming over, speaking there, having panel discussions. It will be very, very interesting and very, very exciting. And I'm looking forward to being back again in my home country and back again to see my good friend, the Bundespräsident from Austria, Van der Bellen. Thank you very much, Sasha, for the wonderful interview and for the wonderful Stammtisch, okay? Have a good week and a good month, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you, Arnold. Okay, thank you. All the best in the meantime. See you in Vienna.
Thank you. Danke vielmals. Bis später.
Bis später.